So just unmute. Good afternoon, everybody. It's now 4:45, so it's time for me to start this session of the New Southwark Plan examination. For those of you who've not attended previous sessions, just to introduce myself, my name's David Spencer. I'm one of two inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out the examination of the New Southwark Plan alongside my colleague, Mr. Milam. I think in terms of just gathering my recollections of who's previously attended, I think most, looking at my screen, have. For those who haven't, obviously these hearing sessions are proceeding by way of Zoom. If you're familiar with Zoom, obviously unmute, and if you want to switch your camera on when you want to make a particular point, and it depends which version of Zoom you're running, but there's a raise hand function. It can either be on the bottom of the screen or on a menu bar to the right of your right of the screen. A yellow hand symbol. If you click on that, that will indicate to me that you wish to come in on a particular point. Otherwise, I'll try and bring you in on the discussion at the relevant point. In terms of the session this afternoon, we're looking at the Rotherhithe area and a number of sites within Rotherhithe, and I'm also using the final part of this afternoon's session to revisit site-specific matters in relation to an earlier discussion on houseboat accommodation. So I'm going to discuss sites NSP 77 and NSP 78 first. Before I do and bring in various people on those two sites, the plan obviously contains an area vision for Rotherhithe. It's within, as I understand it, the Canada Water sort of opportunity area. So there are various kind of quantums of growth that the council is envisaging in this area. Obviously an area that's within the last sort of 30 or so years has obviously undergone transformation of kind of varying degrees, but I would just take it from sort of the evidence that's before us, Ms. Seymour, that the plan's now sort of facilitating the kind of the final sort of phases of the kind of the planned growth of this area, or revisiting sites that 30 or 30 so years ago had one use, but as times change, now's the time to kind of look at alternatives going forward.
Yes, there were 18 sites in the 2015 Canada Water Area Action Plan. There was a 2012 Area Action Plan that had 23 sites, and then that was updated because Harmsworth Quays let us know, just as we were at the last day of the examination on this plan, that they were going to move out of the area. So that meant we had to do an early amendment, which led to the 2015 version with some of the sites changing. So moving forward from the 2015 version, there's been considerable delivery. There's been 1,508 square metres of B class delivered, 66 homes under construction, and 1,210 that have been delivered. Retail, community and leisure delivered 8,043 square metres. So that's where we are now, moving forward from where we were in 2015. We're recommending that, the same as with the other area action plans, that this the New Southwark Plan is a standalone document that does not rely on the area action plans. We're not recommending at this point that it is rescinded. However, we will be taking it to members when we adopt the New Southwark Plan, and we have set up the documents, and we are proposing some changes so that the New Southwark Plan can be adopted, and if necessary, the AAP can be rescinded. In the vision itself, for Rotherhithe, there are a number of sites which have been taken forward from the area action plan. We can go through those. They're mainly the core sites that are in the master plan, so sites 77 and 78. They're the ones which have been taken forward from the Canada Water, and we would recommend that all of the other sites which are on the visions map are removed moving forward, because they've all been developed except for the boatyard, which we are discussing later at this hearing. In the new, so you've got the Roberts Close and the police station sites from the AAP, and then you've got the larger sites with Mulberry, Decathlon and the shopping centre. So that's how things have progressed. Those have all come together, so there's just a bit of a different configuration where you've got the Mulberry and Decathlon together, and then you've got the shopping centre as a site with there's Roberts Close next to the Ecology Park, and then the police station the other side of the large development, so the Southwark Park side. So that's how it all moves on. So with the new vision for Rotherhithe, we're looking at an uplift of employment net of 22,196 square metres, an uplift net of retail, leisure and community of 9,958 square metres, housing 4,712 units net. The capacities are based on the average of residential unit range set out in the master plan for the Canada Water planning application, and that's the site allocation NSP 78. That also includes the figure for NSP 77, which we recognise there are still issues which we will be discussing today about where there's the statement of common ground, and that's for 796 units. There would be a difference of depending on how the site progresses. So I just thought I would raise that now, because that's obviously a significant number. We don't think that would impact on being able to deliver our housing target, but obviously it is an issue we need to discuss. Open space, 13,696 square metres. So those are our main targets. And then for the vision itself, we're proposing that the growth opportunities section, we introduce those figures and we say what the new figures are moving forward, and we say what's being delivered. And as we discussed this morning, the new figures would be a main modification, and then the explaining how delivery has taken place would be a minor modification. And so we can show that in the plan to make sure it's clear how development is progressing in this area and what we're expecting moving forward. I think with this vision, it really shows the difference from the area action plan, because if you look at the map, there were quite a number of sites that were all around the outside and the inside and the whole, they covered the whole area. So we some of this peninsula is often it's got a real core centre, and then it's got an outer area as well, and there's a road that goes around which you can be, and in the Canada Water plan there were many sites that we were delivering throughout the area. Now all of the smaller sites have been delivered, so now we're really looking at the core and where the opportunity area core is situated and how that's going to move forward. Most of the development in that area has already got a master plan, so or a planning application. So on 78 and 77, that's already covered. We've got a few new sites that we are proposing in this vision for Rotherhithe, which we'll go through today. So we've got the gas holder, which is 75, that wasn't there before, and St Olave's Business Park 76. And then 77 and 78 were, I've explained, they progress QAP 5, 8, 17 and 18. And then you've got the Croft Street Depot as well. So lot less sites, but still a significant amount of development, because that it's from the core opportunity area.
Thank you for that, Seymour. So in terms of the area vision map, presumably that potentially would now be modified to remove those Canada Water Area Action Plan sites that have now been delivered and completed.
Yeah.
Okay. And then just finally, in terms of the vision map, I was obviously drawn to sort of extensive areas of open space, Stave Hill, Southwark Park. In terms of the status, I mean, obviously they're shown as open space. Presumably they have various kind of protections and designations.
So the mole, the big ones are mole. Southwark Park is mole, and the Stave Ecological Park. And then the smaller ones are generally bowl. A few of them are ooze, but there's a network of open space. And then there's 2 very large open spaces.
Okay.
But the woodland, you know, some of it is woodlands as well, so it's not as usable. Although, actually thinking about it, don't say that to my children. But anyway, you know, like a lot of people do use the woods, but a lot of it is an ecological park. So it's, you know, it's not. I suppose what I was trying to say was it's not as open as Southwark Park, which is a park where everyone would go to for all different types of recreation and activity. Whereas the use of the ecological park is a bit more limited, but there's still lots of options for using that as well. And as you can see, there's lots of routes through the area where you can travel around to have good accessibility to the different spaces. Yeah. There's also the borough open water as well that you can see. And then there's the water sports, which is provided on one of those.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I think in terms of what the council has outlined is consistent, I think, with the approach you're intending to take with other area visions. So that sounds helpful in terms of a potential modification, so it's clearer to people the kind of the extent of change in these areas. In terms of the sites, if I can sort of deal with them in 2 parts. I mean, I had no specific sound, having visited the sites in terms of NSP 75, 76 and 79. I've got no soundness questions relating to those sites from the council. I wasn't really anticipating to hear from anybody else on those sites today, but I will. Mr. Brearley, of course, yes, please.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to say something briefly on those 3, and I'm not planning to take part in the big site discussions. So can I do that now?
Please do. Yes, please, Mr. Brearley.
To say that in this Rotherhithe area, we have seen rapid and dramatic shrinkage of industrial accommodation, including, of course, loss of the Printworks accommodation, as well as the use, and the 80s industrial estate to its east. On the big sites, that's irreversible, I assume, all settled via the AAP and now the planning permissions. Little bit of room for manoeuvre, but I doubt it's going to allow us any industrial. So there is a danger that we end up with not far off nil industrial accommodation in the area. None of the big redevelopments, and of course the main one, Canada Water, propose any, not even a single space for a bakery or a car repair workshop or a joiner's shop or a builder's lockup or anything like that. The person leading the development came to see me at our factory a few years ago. I know him actually, nice man. And I asked if there could be some space in his huge development for some of the businesses being pushed out from elsewhere, from the Old Kent Road, for example. He said yes, as long as you can pay £30 or £40 a square foot, much chuckling. So that's the challenge. So just to take those 3 little opportunities, NSP 75, the old gasometer site, to me that seems like a good modest opportunity, not just for putting housing, but instead to redress this problem just a little. Please, can we have at least one site for new modest scale industrial in this entire borough to meet a little of the well-evidenced need, which the council has spectacularly ignored. St Olave's Business Centre, NSP 76, if that is redeveloped, as I guess is likely, I would urge a requirement that the replacement B use class could be in part light industrial B2, B8, demand for which is likely to be stronger than office. It's a very odd place for office use in this day and age. And finally, NSP 79, the Croft Street Depot, I think the allocation could be more prescriptive of the requirement for light industrial B2 and B8. It does mention B8, but it goes broader, and we know where that goes. So rather than this much used broader employment floor space, in inverted commas, or this one small business workspace, I think this is a case where there could be an insistence again on a smaller scale, industrially focused accommodation. So yes, thoughts on those three. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Mr. Briley. Is there anything on those sites that the council wishes to come back on or rebut?
No, so we've set out, only to say that we've set out the changes following the use class order in EIP 204.
Okay. Yes, thank you for that. In which case, can I move on then in terms of the agenda to NSP 77? This is the Decathlon site at Mulberry Business Park. Obviously, the plan as submitted sets out various requirements. Excuse me. One of the uses that the site must provide is new homes, but I think as you referred to, Ms. Seymour, there's a statement of common ground is with it. Art Invest Real Estate, who are represented by DP9. I don't know if we've got somebody from DP9 here this afternoon. Is that yourself, Mr. Smith?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. And it seems to me that direction of travel on this site is now moving more towards a commercial led scheme following. There's obviously been some activity at this site, so I don't know if you describe it as phase one or the Decathlon site closest to sort of the Canada Water Centre has obviously been developed, and there appears to be further development under construction to the east of the site, which I think is that student accommodation.
Yes, sir. So there are three separate land ownerships within this site allocation. There's the Scape site, which is the one under construction for student housing with some other uses. The land owned by Notting Hill Genesis, which has been built out and completed as phase one of a consented residential scheme for the wider Decathlon site. And then there is the site owned by my client Art Invest, which comprises phases 2, 3 and 4 of the consented scheme as yet unbuilt.
Okay, and in terms of the requirements as set out, is the council now seeking a proposed modification to remove the must provide new homes?
No, so we're saying that if you would decide that modification should be made, that we would not object to that modification, but we're not actually proposing it. It's being proposed by AIR. We would, if there's an option available, we would like to leave the option more open so that residential could come forward or employment could come forward, because whilst there is there have been pre-application conversations. We don't have a scheme at the moment which has been permitted or that's being consulted on, and so we don't have that scheme, that certainty, which would enable us to propose an amendment. So we wouldn't block, we wouldn't suggest that we wouldn't agree with an amendment if you chose to direct that, but we would. But if there wasn't, and also a third option would be, the options are leave it as it is, change it to all employment, or leave it where either could come forward without any specific requirement for either, because there's pros and cons on both sides. There's the pros for the residential, because we need the housing. But then, as you can see from Statement of Common Ground, there's the owner of the site and their aspiration to deliver the employment, and that can also bring benefits. So there are arguments from both sides there, which I'm sure you'll consider.
So in terms of an alternative way, I mean, obviously development of the site must, and it would already included, provide employment floor space. I mean, would this be potentially a site where development should, instead of must provide housing, should provide housing?
Yes, sir, and we would need to look at the capacity as well, because if it was a should, we would need to amend the housing capacity for that particular part of the site from 1,371 down to 575, because we don't include the should housing in our figures, only the must. And we would need to increase the opportunity for the employment capacity. So whereas we couldn't rely on that in our figures, it would be, we would need to think about how we would illustrate that, because it's quite a significant amount.
Yes, I mean, I wasn't clear from the Statement of Common Ground how much employment floor space would be likely to come forward with this and the site, and so how consistent that would be with the sort of the overall spatial strategy in terms of where you want to deliver employment floor space and new jobs. I don't know, Mr. Smith from DP9.
Yes, so if I can help there, on the employment floor space quantum, as Ms. Seymour says, we are still at pre-application stage, so we haven't made an application yet to the council, so that floor space hasn't yet been determined, but we indicated within the Statement of Common Ground that we'd submitted a request for, well, we indicated a figure, which is a figure that we've included within our request for an EIA scoping opinion, which is up to 150,000 square metres of employment floor space. And that's principally office space, but with some complementary town centre uses as well.
Thank you. And what would be the submission to me from DP9 if I was of a view that, well, the plan's been submitted, it's at a relatively late stage of its kind of progress towards adoption. Circumstances appear to potentially be changing at a relatively late stage, but at the time the council submitted this plan, this was, the situation, and this was the reasonable kind of expectation of what this site was likely to deliver.
We appreciate the timing, sir. We were principally concerned in relation to our new owners, our client's purchase of the site, principally concerned about the indicative residential capacity number, and it was that element of the site allocation on which we made our initial reps. If that figure was purely sort of a reference back to an existing consent, but didn't set if you like, a minimum or a baseline expectation for the site, then there may not have been a policy issue. But I think as we as was discussed at the hearing last weekend, in relation to the wording of the indicative residential capacity. It seems clear that that does in fact establish a baseline expectation. I think baseline is the word that's been used rather than a minimum. And therefore we would be concerned with the current housing numbers going forward in that sense within the plan, because at present our client's intention is to not deliver those. I mean, in terms of the three options that Ms. Seymour set out earlier, I think it's worth saying that we appreciate the option that is set out in the Statement of Common Ground at present, which is to effectively preserve the option for either route, that the plan is not reliant on those housing numbers coming forward within the 0 to 5 year supply, but it also doesn't preclude those in the longer term as a potential. But our clear intent is to bring forward a commercial scheme in the short term, and we'd like to do that in a way that is consistent with the plan rather than against it.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, from the council's perspective, I'm just trying to sort of reconcile. There's a clear spatial strategy set up in policy SP1A and B, about particularly SP1B, in terms of kind of the proportions of kind of particular land uses and growth. I mean, this is potentially, it's not an insignificant, apologies, double negative change in terms of what's likely to happen within the overall spatial strategy, in terms of that sort of potential quantum of employment versus sort of the decrease in residential. I take the council's point that over years 6 to 15 there's a reasonable kind of headroom in terms of supply. Just wondering whether a significant change now would kind of tilt or unduly kind of affect the overall strategy.
We think that we can accommodate both. The housing figures can still be delivered with this housing figure. If the employment is not provided, then we can deliver it as we've proposed in our current plan. If we take this option, if we take the housing option, then we deliver as we set out in our plan. If we take the employment option, then we would have more employment, which would be positive, especially in this location. So we can deal with either. If we have less housing than we had set out in our plan, we can still meet our target. We still have enough in our buffer, but the buffer would obviously be significantly less. So we do have enough margin to be able to do either.
Okay, and the basic rationale for making a change now in the context of soundness would be to result in an effective plan, a plan that is deliverable.
That's right, sir, because if we set out a site allocation and the landowner's telling us they're not going to deliver it, then that does pose a problem for us for deliverability. But we don't have enough certainty of that deliverability at present to propose this ourselves. One issue as well, sir, is whether it should be a may instead of a should for the housing, because then it would be more, I think that would be more in keeping with the proposal that is being put forward by AIR. I don't know if Mr. Smith has a view on that. Sorry, sir. Sampling words into his mouth, sir. Sorry.
I think, sir, as the site allocation currently stands, of course, it isn't a site allocation that relates purely to my client's ownership. It covers other sites. So at the minute, the must and should, I suppose, relate to all of those ownerships, and therefore housing has already been delivered on part of that site allocation. So I don't know whether, so this is also relating to effectively a redrawing of those must and should or may, just in relation to the undeveloped part of our site, because as things currently stand, housing has already been delivered in that site allocation. And in fact, I think all of the must and should have, with the exception of community uses, which is something that we are proposing to bring forward in our scheme.
So at the moment on this site, it's a must and a may, not a should. There's either the must uses or the may uses. So the issue that I was raising was about, if we say development should, then we have to make sure the must requirements are met first. All possible efforts should be made to achieve all the site requirements of both must and should. So I'm just raising that might be quite a bit problematic. So I was looking at the may. It says may achieve certain land uses if there is sufficient flexibility after achieving the strategic requirements as required by the must and should. So this site doesn't have any shoulds. So I know a lot of the sites do, but this one doesn't. And so that's why I was proposing that maybe, you know, if there was going to be such a considerable amount of employment coming forward and not housing, that it might be more appropriate for it to be a may. That I'll leave that to you, sir, to deliberate when you're considering whether you want to direct us.
Okay, I'm afraid I do need a bit more help on just the clarity in terms of, I take the point about shoulds and mays, and I appreciate this is a wider site, and obviously the council's indicated at previous sessions it doesn't want to now change boundaries even if some parts of the site have been developed.
Yes.
Which is obviously a situation here. I mean, as outlined before, part of the site is now built and occupied. Part of the site is now pretty advanced in terms of its construction. Just so I'm absolutely clear, Mr. Smith, so the balance of what's left, that's entirely within your client's control?
It is, yes. So.
Yeah. So in terms of sort of taking this forward and trying to get the flexibility that perhaps you both are seeking, I mean, so option one is just keep things as they are and accept that through past and ongoing events, the overall requirements of the policy will be met, albeit in different ways, in different site ownerships, but cumulatively you come together and you deliver what's required. But the risk is you may fall short on the indicative capacity of 1,371. So presumably a modification could be to change that, but to do that, Ms. Seymour, would probably require the housing to be now be a may.
I think so, sir. I mean, we could on this site, if we, as it is considering these two options, we could remove the parts that have already been delivered. The reason why we don't do that is because of the way that the figures are measured by the GLA. But in order to provide clarity on the site moving forward, it might be better to look at to have the let me just think what I'm trying to say. So it would be difficult to try to deliver uses which have already been delivered. So on this site, because there are so many uses, we could look at how that could be changed. I mean, the issue is if we did start looking at that, the student accommodation's already been delivered, so we would be removing that. So we'd be looking, there'd still be the public realm, employment, and homes. That's what we're looking at the moment, and retail. So the issue then is whether we would have to look at the other uses. So that's why we were suggesting to keep it in as the larger site rather than to remove parts of the site that have already been built, because that would be quite a big change, if you start removing whole use classes from the from the site allocation. So that's why we were suggesting that we have the must. You've got the must.
Is it? I mean, I'm sorry, I may be missing something, but I mean, is the simplest way forward not to just keep this site as it is, as it's submitted? I mean, it's an indicative capacity. I appreciate, Mr. Smith, your concern that that's becomes a kind of a baseline expectation, but I mean, either the policy stays that it is, and the indicative capacity is adjusted.
I think that would certainly be our preference, that the must and the may stay as they are, but the indicative capacity is reduced to reflect that. We are obviously keen that we can bring forward a planning application that is compliant with the emerging local plan, and so we'd like to address this in a way that that allows that scheme to come forward.
Okay.
Without effectively presenting it as a loss of housing or loss of required housing.
So the indicative capacity would presumably be a new figure of 575, which would reflect what's been there,
Yes,
what's taken place there.
Yes.
And the council, if that was a view we'd come to, would not resist, or?
That's right, sir.
Okay. Apologies, it's been a long day, but I think I'm finally getting there in terms of where this might be going. Just in terms of other things that are kind of going on in this site. All right, in reading EIP 82A that there is already a live reserve matters application on this site.
Sorry, sir, let me just check. I just need to get to the right point. I'm still at the last site we were on. So
Okay.
this is NSP 77. Yes, I don't know. I've also got my colleague, Mr. Glasgow, here, who's from Development Management from the Strategic Applications team. Just to check. So we've got Mr. Glasgow, could I just check with you, please? Is there a reserve matter? Oh, sorry, Ms. Lewis might answer for me, sir. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm not sure who's dealing with this site from my colleagues.
I'm happy to hear now from either Ms. Lewis or Mr. Glasgow.
I can confirm as well. So if that's helpful, there are reserve matter applications in relation to phases 2, 3, and 4 of the residential consent across the site. Those were submitted some time ago now to sort of get in within the time frame before before the permission no longer allowed them to be submitted. They remain to be determined with the council.
Okay, I don't know if Ms. Lewis from the council can advise on where those applications are. It sounds like they haven't been formally withdrawn despite the change in site ownership. I mean, is it your client, Mr. Smith, who submitted those?
No, sir, they were submitted under the previous ownership.
Previous ownership, okay. Miss Lewis, please.
Yes, they've been caught in effect in the transition between the landowners. So they were submitted by the previous landowner. The council is still waiting for various pieces of information to be submitted, and I suppose the transition has made the collection of that information more difficult because it's sitting with the previous client who no longer has an interest in the land. So they are slightly stuck in the system. We do need to find a resolution which allows the Art Invest scheme then to move forward unencumbered.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think, as I mentioned a moment ago, I think I'm probably hopefully now getting the right end of the stick in terms of a way forward on this. And it sounds to me, Ms. Seymour, that probably what you want from us when we sort of provide a post-hearings letter is a sort of a direction on the way forward for this site for the council.
Please.
Yeah.
Yes, please, sir.
And the indicative figure would be 575.
Yes.
I mean, we've discussed previously about expressing some of these sites as a sort of a minimum. It strikes me that would not necessarily be problematic here in terms of the flexibility that's that sort.
Yes,
I know Mr. Smith might want to tell me, no, this commercial scheme is definitely happening, and this is the way forward with this site. I'm just wondering if things change, again, not to tie you to a very precise figure, if it was expressed as a minimum.
Well, no, so I mean, you're quite right. It's our intention at the moment to bring forward that scheme, but of course anything could happen. But the 575 number derives from phase 1, which has actually been built, and the Scape student housing scheme, which is under construction. So I think there's a fair degree of certainty within those 575 homes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Are there any further comments from Mr. Smith or the council in relation to site NSP 77? No. Okay. Can I thank people for their contributions on that, and I'll now move on to site NSP 78, which is obviously the Surrey Harmsworth Quays site. Again, just coming back to the council in terms of the site requirements for, obviously this is quite a large site, but it's a site now that has planning consent, is that right, or an outline with a master plan, Ms. Seymour?
Yes. Yes, so there's an outline on this site with a large master plan with all of the, and then there's 3 detailed plots as well, which have had permission, which are being developed at the moment.
I see. So when you go on site, you can see sort of various activities of what I would call sort of peripheral. They sort of seem sort of logical, kind of separate sort of parts of the site, sort of the edge of the site that seem to have some sort of construction activity. So those are sort of initial phases linked to that master plan.
Yes, Julie, actually, I just comment that it was a hybrid application,
Okay.
so partly in full and partly in outline. And the 3 outline phases are now in the early stages of construction. Sorry, the three full phases are in early stages of construction.
Thank you. And from the evidence that's been provided previously, there sounds like there's quite a degree of flexibility around this master plan in terms of how the ultimate kind of balance of mix of uses kind of shake out as the scheme goes forward. Is that correct? So that's why we've got quite a range in terms of the housing, and I know the council is sort of putting to us in terms of the trajectory to kind of go for the middle, so it's about 3,000. But similarly, as I see it, there's quite a bit of flexibility on the other uses that could come forward on this site.
Yes, the permission was sought and approved very much in the spirit of understanding the very long time frame under which it's likely to be implemented, and therefore I think all parties agreed that it was necessary and sensible to include a lot of flexibility to respond to the market as, you know, during the decade or so over which it'll be built out, to maximise the possibility of it actually being capable of being delivered. So that's what's happened. The applicant produced an illustrative master plan which represented a sort of middle ground in terms of housing numbers and employment quantums for viability testing and other, to allow people to be able to understand and conceive the scheme. But within that, within the actual permission, there is quite a large scope of flexibility to deliver up to around 4,000 housing units, and what we would have called a housing-led scheme or an employment-led scheme, so at either ends of the continuum of use options within the permission.
And in terms of those initial phases that are under construction, are those residential elements? So the council able to advise me, I see from the trajectory that's assumed there'll be some delivery within the next 5 years in terms of housing numbers.
The early phases are very mixed. So we have a leisure centre for the council, which has offices above it and adjacent to it, and then we have a residential tower and separately a site called K1, which is an entirely housing scheme.
Okay. Thank you for that. And just in terms of the background to this site, I mean, is this a site that's kind of in, presumably it's in, I mean, that's a large site, single ownership?
Yes, I mean, it has the benefit of being in the single ownership of British Land.
Thank you. Just to clarify, in terms of the requirements on the site's got to provide new education facilities. So is a new school part of the master plan, or new schools part of the master plan, or has things changed and there's available capacity elsewhere?
The expectation is that the education need will be met by the expansion of existing schools within the area. There are a number of schools which have, for instance, one form of entry school, which would be expected to be increased to a 2 form of entry school. They have the ability within those, the school sites themselves, to deliver additional classroom space.
Thank you. And obviously, I mean, just a final point on this side, and obviously there are a mix of uses on there, from retail to Tesco supermarkets, commercial, leisure, cinema, etc. I mean, through the master plan, is the intention to seek to reaccommodate those uses, work around those uses, in terms of just understanding the ability of this site to contribute over the plan period?
I might draw in Michael Glasgow, but in short, Tesco were always part of the conversation. So the expectation is that they will be reaccommodated within the site to allow them continuity of trading in a similar size store format. There is the flexibility within the master plan to accommodate a new cinema. Cinemas are obviously finding it difficult at the moment, but the hope is that there will be a cinema able to go back into the scheme. And similarly with other leisure uses, there is a quantum defined within the development specification to allow space for other forms of leisure uses. I don't know whether Mr. Glasgow wants to add to that. He's probably more on top of the detail than I am.
I think the only other point I would add is that there's a mechanism in the Section 106 agreement as well to give a right of first refusal to a bingo operator to potentially continue that operation on the site.
Okay. Thank you for that. I've got no further questions on NSP 78. I mean, obviously it's perhaps different to some of the other allocations, and it's obviously now got a permission, hybrid permission and master plan for the whole site. So obviously provides some degree of certainty that something's going to happen there. But I mean, presumably the outcome, I mean, it's how can I describe it? It's a site of its time when the car was very much for front and fore of kind of thinking. I mean, presumably this is a site with considerable potential for optimization and perhaps redress some of the balance of land use or land take that's given to highway and other activities, or am I getting that wrong?
No, that's absolutely right. I think the master plan delivers a substantial reduction in the car parking that you can see if you've been to the site recently, in favour of a combination of uses that we would see as more befitting to a sort of modern town centre in central London.
Yeah. Yes, sorry, I should remember that. Obviously, that's right. It's obviously close to, is it the Canada Water transport hub, and as you say, a town centre location. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you for that. I've got no further questions on site NSP 78. So that brings me on to the fourth and final point of the agenda, which is to revisit the discussion, or part of the discussion we had back on I think it was the 1st of March, in relation to South Dock, Greenland Dock and St George's Wharf. I appreciate subsequent to that discussion, there's now a statement of common ground with the South Dock Marine Holders Association. So that's obviously in front of the examination. I mean, just to briefly take an overview of that statement of common ground, I don't know if either turn to the council first and then to the Marine Dock Holders Association. That seems to me there's kind of two parts. One is where we're at in terms of the needs assessment more generally, and then issue 2 around sort of site specifics.
Yes, so we are carrying out a needs assessment. There has been a change there from when we reported to you earlier in the hearings, and the company carrying out the needs assessment has been changed, but it is still being carried out, and I'm sure the people here today will be able to tell you more about that because they've been doing it, but it is moving forward, so that is happening. So that's the first thing. The assessment will be reported back to the council, and then if we do need to carry out an amendment to the plan, we will do that as an early amendment, and we've set that out in all of our documentation so that we are being clear and transparent about the way forward. So that's the first issue, which I think we were in agreement on. And then the second.
Sorry, Ms. Seymour, just to pick up on there. So I think the consultancy I've read who are doing the work is it RRR, who I think
Yes, sir.
I've come across them previously, so I think they are recognised in this field. So that's reassuring.
Yes, so they've worked for a number of London boroughs, and we consulted the groups of boroughs that we work with to ask who had used other consultants, because we wanted to change our consultants, and so that's who we were recommended. So we'll be using them in the future for any assessments that we do of boat dwellers.
And in terms of, I think you just so I'm clear from what you said there, Ms. Seymour, in terms of the timing of that output, later this summer or this year?
Yes, it will be later this summer, and then we will be in the autumn reporting to members on what action needs to be taken moving forward, if we need to take any action, and how that might be timetabled. And then we would update the LDS.
I understand. So could feed into a plan review mechanism.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, and I'll come back to the Marine Dock Holders Association shortly. I appreciate there's probably an alternative view in terms of what we should be doing. But on the second part, then, Miss Seymour, in terms of site specifics.
Yes, so there's the boat dwellers would like the site to be as an allocation, and they would like it protected for the boat yard use. The council would not support that being the only use on the site, where we would support that as a use on the site, but we would also expect some residential to come forward on that site, and therefore that's the matter of disagreement.
Okay. And just to be clear on this point, I mean, obviously, we mentioned at the start of this discussion, there's the Canada Water Area Action Plan that allocates the St George's Wharf site as site CWAAP 16.
Yes, sir.
There is already an extant policy for that site. So I'll bear that in mind. Just to be absolutely clear in terms of what the Marine Dock Holders Association is seeking, is it more than that? Are you seeking that the docks themselves are purposefully allocated or safeguarded as a particular designation within the plan? I don't know if it's Ms. Orgelar or somebody from the Marine Holders Association wants to start or pick up the point.
Should I?
Mr. Kendall?
Thank you, sir. I think we're fairly convinced of the robust protection for the docks and preventing any more infilling that took place in the 70s around Southwark. So we're fairly happy with the designation for the docks, the water space. potential increase in mooring spaces, and so forth. But our real bone of contention is the idea that residential and the boatyard can coexist. It never happens anywhere else, and it certainly won't happen here without undeniable levels of conflict. And as we've seen in other areas, the boatyards are almost always the losers, because for legislative reasons, I guess, the complaints of homeowners who either may be concerned about noise or maybe just seeking to improve their property values, as has been noted elsewhere, not in Southwark. The two are just mutually exclusive, and we've looked at this from all sorts of ways and talked with experts about noise abatement and noise prevention, but inherently there will be noise. And some people can tolerate loud noises, some people can tolerate no noise. Rotherhithe itself, the peninsula, is a very quiet place for London, as it doesn't have any, we're over half a mile away from the nearest trunk road where we're sited. And so we don't have any white noise from traffic to mask anything else that's going on in the area. It really is an unsustainable proposition that any form of residential could be sited on the boatyard side. And if our plans could come to fruition, there wouldn't actually be a space for a residential development of any great size. There have been several attempts in the past by Southwark to put parts of this site to the residential market via its Gateway 1 exercises with their preferred developers. And nobody would come forward to take it on as a possible development site. And the reasons are manifestly obvious. A, the potential for conflict, but B, the subsoil conditions. There was recently a geo survey underground which suggests the ground isn't suitable for building it to any great height. The costs would be enormous. The southern edge of the site is above an underground river, and so that would need extraordinarily deep pilings. The site itself is marginally above the indicative 100 flood zone from the Thames. We regularly reach levels just 12 inches below overtopping the river wall in that place. Now, that wouldn't really be a problem for the type of light industrial business units and boatyard we propose. After all, boats are designed to float. I say that in jest, but any large residential development would need subsurface service facilities, and digging a hole that close to the Thames would just lead to flooding, water ingress. It's basically built on shingle and soft sand and mud. Our proposals for the site would include only building on a float, on a concrete float. We may be aware that that's not as earth friendly as possible, but realistically, it has to be an above surface development. It cannot go into the ground to any great degree. Southwark paid for a geo survey of the site, and our last councillor's comments were it would be very expensive to build anything of any economic scale on the site. So, as we said in our last meeting, there are many sites, as we've been listening to in this local area, that are eminently suitable for residential use. And there's this one site which is eminently suitable for both Southwark's agenda towards the river and also London in generally. Only this morning we had the river police in there being lifted out of the water because their boat got caught up with some flotsam in the river. So it limped into the marina, it was lifted out, cleared and put back. And when they left, one of the high-speed rib tourist boats came in off the river, was lifted out, cleared and put back in the water. So it runs a vital service both to the pleasure, leisure, police, the fire boat comes in here for quick servicing to be lifted out and more routine maintenance. So everything about the site is focused on the River Thames, its activities, its support businesses, and it's active, and there is a constant noise, more so than you would get with any residential development. So it seems curious that Southwark or us would actually advocate residential development on the site, because it would just lead to years of conflict that someone would have to deal with. And I don't know if we can show it today, but we have several architects living in our community, one of which won the Sterling Prize recently, so quite adept architects. And they're bringing forward some ideas for how the site can be developed, and it would be profitable to Southwark as the site owner, and it would serve a function to address the very crucial needs of the whole of the River Thames. But again, it would be hard to raise the capital for development while there is a threat of it being closed down through noise complaints. So we just cannot understand why for so long there has been a need for, you know, a small number of residential units. You wouldn't get a lot of residential units on there because the space is needed for other things. So can we not just get this Damoclean sword removed from over our heads and carry on with the principal objective of the site? It is the last Thames-facing site that can support this type of business that we're aware of in central London. And as I say, it supports the emergency services, it supports the leisure services. And with some development, it would support all sorts of incubator and established businesses, which could address Mike Briley's objectives of, it's not industrial, but it's work, it's employment. Employment should be our target here, not just another few dozen bedrooms. That is our point. That's why we ask, you know, to resolve this once and for all so we could move on. This has been going on since the Unitary Development Plan of 2007. So it doesn't help us and our objectives, and it doesn't help Southwark and their objectives. So if we could get residential removed, we could all move forward and Southwark would be a better place for it. Thank you. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kendall. I don't know if Ms. Ursula wants to follow on from that, and then I'll hear from Mr. Brierley.
Yes, thank you, sir. So just to tie this to the question that you have to decide, I just wanted to point out the two areas of disagreement flowing from not only the statement of common ground in respect of the site allocation, but also EIP 208, which is the boat dweller note provided by Southwark Council. So the areas of disagreement are the South Dock Marina Association believe it, in order for the plan to be sound, and if the Canada Water Area Action Plan is to be rescinded, a site allocation is needed to flow through to the new Southwark plan for St George's Wharf. And the other area of disagreement is that it is sound to include residential. The site should provide residential use class C3. We don't think that's justified or effective, and it would be helpful to us to explore with the council more about why they think it is justified and effective, considering previous, as you've heard in detail from Mr. Kendall, previous applications have never come forward, the site isn't suitable, and there's been an inclusion, but it hasn't actually been deliverable, crucially. And I see also Mr. Billy's hand is up, and to sort of support what he has said earlier, this site has sort of not sort of inclusion, but sort of organic, arising mostly from the residents there, uses for light industrial makerspace, and some of the residents here can tell you more about that, but that is a prime sort of use of the site going forward. It isn't included in the draft site allocation in EIP 208, but we would like to request that it is in replacement of this should requirement for residential development on the site. I think that's what I wanted to point out at this stage.
Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Orgelar. Mr. Burley, please.
Thank you. Yes, just to chime in with the concerns about co-locating housing and a boatyard. It is a daft idea. It's a self-evidently clunky, often noisy industrial use, even though it's on a relatively small scale. And it's a type of use for which there is a severe shortage along the Thames now. I agree that the boatyard, this small industrial use that brings disproportionate benefits, community benefit as well as the work and activity benefit, should be protected by designation as industrial and as a boatyard. Ideas of trying to co-locate residential should be dropped, and I believe that to do otherwise would be unsound in relation to London Plan. Is it policy SI 15, the one that regards water transport, that does highlight the significance of boatyards and the need to protect them? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Burley. Ms. Orgelar, has that prompted another point?
Yeah, it has. Mr. Rees just reminded me that I wanted to raise the specific policies. They are included in our statement of common ground, so you probably have them, but it's policy SI 16 part B, particularly of the New London Plan, which talks about waterways use and enjoyment, and development proposals should protect and enhance where possible water-related cultural, educational and community facilities and events, and new facilities should be supported and promoted, but should take into consideration the protection and other uses of the waterways. And also, this isn't in our statement of common ground, so this isn't repetition, but I just wanted to highlight MPP F paragraph 180, and Mr. Kendall talked about the noise, the noise in the area, and whether that would work with the proposal to bring residential forward. And I think that paragraph deals with some of the concerns and the sensitivity in site in respect of wider impacts that could arise from development. So in doing so, they should mitigate and reduce to a minimum potential adverse impacts resulting from noise from new development, and avoid noise giving rise to significant impacts on health and quality of life. But in sort of the reverse of how you could envisage this going forward, as Mr. Kendall mentioned, if there was a proposal that did get through for residential development, but that hasn't happened in all these years because of the difficulties on the site as have been described.
Okay, thank you for that. As outlined at the sort of the start of this discussion, and obviously this site is identified and allocated in the existing Canada Water area action plans as a site allocation. And I guess as inspectors, when we picked up this plan, the new Southwark plan, from everything we read at the start of the examination, I think our assumption was that the Canada Water Area Action Plan would remain and sit alongside the adopted new Southwark plan, accepting that some sites the council was going to sort of transfer into the new Southwark plan. I guess our question is, why now at a very or reasonably late stage of kind of plan making process would it be necessary to take in effect an allocation from the Canada Water Area Action Plan and put it into the new Southwark plan principle at this late stage? Would the alternative be we examine the plan before us, it doesn't have an allocation for this site, and it would be for a plan review of the new Southwark plan to look at whether the council wanted to take forward the existing Canada Water Area Action Plan. That could go through several rounds of consultation. The issue now is if this went forward as a main modification, there'll be one round of consultation, and that will be it as part of this plan making process at this stage. I don't know, from the council's perspective, why couldn't we leave the Canada Water Area Action Plan in place and this to be dealt with through plan the next sort of plan review of the new Southwark plan?
We can, sir. We can leave it in place. I think that we were reacting to the boat dwellers' proposal that the site allocation should just be for a boatyard. So the site allocation could just stay in the Canada Water Area Action Plan. But if you were to consider an amendment to the plan to allocate this site, then we would not support an allocation without the additional uses that have already been through examination before.
Thank you. I mean, it's obviously been put to me at part of this discussion for the council to explain why it's necessary for residential to be part of that site. I mean, obviously it's part of an existing allocation from, is it 2015? Is that the date of the?
Yes, so 2012 and then 2015, it was updated in 2015. So it was considered for the 2012 AAP.
Okay, so in terms of the potential options that I think that are being sort of put before us, is obviously amend the plan and just allocate this site as a boatyard site, amend the plan to effectively take forward the Canada Water Area Action Plan policy for all intents and purposes, including the ancillary residential element, or, as I say, given where we are, this was a plan submitted without a site allocation for this site, to keep things as they are, and it would be a matter for the next new Southwark plan, probably in tandem with your updated houseboat needs evidence, to sort of reconsider this issue. I have to say I'm concerned about potentially making in effect a new allocation relatively late stage of the process, when not many people would have had the opportunity to be consulted on a proposal or proposed site at earlier stages, if people can follow what I'm saying. And I just wonder whether there's given what's already in the London plan at various policies, is S15, SI15, SI16, SI17, and policy P24 of the new Southwark plan is the Thames policy area. I just wonder whether there is a significant policy vacuum here, that there is already a level of existing policy protection for the existing boatyard sites.
There's already a level of protection for the existing boatyard sites. I think it was Mr. Kendall who was sort of saying that as well. So I don't consider that the protection is necessary from the London, because we already have the London plan and the Southwark plan various protections. So the issue is around the uses on the site and whether housing, or as before a hotel, has also been another use would be appropriate on the site, or whether it should just be protected for the boatyard. Council would be content with not having a site allocation for this site.
Okay. Either Miss Horsler or Miss Murphy next, please.
If I just wanted to very briefly just to really follow on from what Mr. Kendall has already very eloquently described, but I just want to add really how important it is to us as a community who are very long-standing communities that have been historically consistently been overlooked in terms of our needs. This is the first time that we have actually arrived at a point where a needs assessment is about to take place. We are very concerned about this constant reiteration of the housing or residential use over any other use in terms of the infrastructure for the Thames, the future planning for the Thames, in terms of blended transport, in terms of greater numbers of leisure uses, etc., etc. And we just would like to sort of reiterate how our needs as a community and the wider Thames users have very, very urgent needs in terms of the health and safety aspects of living aboard or using the river. So we keep trying to point back to the proposals that we've been putting forward about how we actually need to expand provision for our communities to be able to live and work safely. And so the employment opportunities that already exist and are expanding are also a significant consideration that needs to be taken into, that needs to be taken on board. And we just are also continuing an extraordinary legacy of this particular area. It's a unique area, it has extraordinary historic features, and what we've already described and are in discussions about bringing forward is how we can enhance and protect and kind of build in a really important kind of green way towards the future. And by putting any kind of residential development, there just isn't any room for that, but it's also just totally inappropriate and unsound. So it's just really frustrating for us. We have explored this so many times over the last 20 years, and we really have had to deal with a huge amount of uncertainty in terms of what we can, what facilities can we access. It's really important for us to be able to service our boats to live safely, and any kind of threat to that in terms of complaints from local residents and so on puts our safety in jeopardy. And so we really need a commitment from Southwark to us and to our needs, and to prioritise the use of this land for boats and for maritime activities, as Derek's already described. So I just want to kind of reiterate that. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you for that that contribution, Ms. Murphy. Ms. Horsler again, please.
I just didn't want the point to be lost that I believe you were started asking the council about whether this inclusion of residential in the site allocation was effective and deliverable, because this is a site in the Rotherhithe area of vision, and this is a question for this examination. So I would appreciate if that was asked again.
Thank you. I mean, I think part of the issue for this examination is when the plan was submitted, there is no policy, or there is no allocation for the St George's Wharf site. I think the inclusion or reference to it in the area vision map, I think if the council can clarify this, was more sort of a a matter of kind of completeness to show that alongside the new Southwark plan sites, to see the whole picture, here are the other site allocations that were in the area action plan. Was that the intention of the area vision map?
Yes, sir, but then so many of them have been developed now. That's why we're suggesting that they're taken out, because when we did our completions review, they were all virtually finished and built. So it was only the ones that we were actually continuing through the new Southwark plan that we felt were worth showing, because that's where the new development's going to take place, whereas all of the development that's already happened we'll just show in our monitoring and our online and our annual monitoring review.
But this CWA AP 16 St George's Wharf site it's kind of between, it's not a site that's been developed as the other Canada Water Area Action Plan sites, and it's not a site you've taken forward into the new Southwark plan. So it's if the Canada Water Area Action Plan were to be rescinded, this is possibly one of the sort of policy areas and sites that would, in effect, disappear unless it's either addressed now as part of this plan, or it's picked up as part of a plan review of the new Southwark plan.
That's correct, sir.
And I think what I'm trying to put across to people is I've got some reservations about putting in a site at this very late stage of the plan making process, if the alternative is to just keep the Canada Water Area Action Plan at the moment, and I say leave the matter for plan review at a later stage where people can be more engaged at an earlier stage of the plan making process in terms of what the potential options and choices are for a site in the borough, and that in the interim the London plan policies and the policies of certainly policy P24, the Thames policy, would provide protection to the boatyard site in the interim. I think it's putting it back as to why is it now necessary for soundness to put something in now specifically about this site in the context of existing policy. Mr. Kendall, did you want to come back on that point?
Thank you, sir. The question of soundness, this isn't the first time that the site has been discussed within the planning framework. Everybody locally knows all the issues, not just on boats, but the people who live in the houses around. So it's a well-reprised set of problems. And we're seeking soundness within the plan so that we can carry forward pretty well everybody's desire to see a fully functioning, high technology boatyard. But we can't get the funding from Southwark Council, other departments than planning, and we can't get the funding from other partners while the threat of residential is there. So we've been discussing this very issue for around about 15 years or more. So it's not a new item on the Southwark's agenda, and Juliet knows this. We've met in previous planning processes. So it's not new. It wouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, and it would come as a relief to a great many people if we could soundly say within the forward plan that this is a boatyard for Thames facing businesses and services, and everybody could move on. And some very few years down the road, Southwark would be intensely proud of the place, and they'd forget all about the residential element, I'm sure. Because we've discussed this again in previous forums, that there would be no social housing within the residential area. And if there were social housing, it would quickly enter into the private sector through the right to buy. We know this. And so that would increase the pressures from people who occupied the residential properties to try and increase their property values by removing the boatyard. We've been round and round this many times. It's not a new discussion. So what we're asking here in this process with you as an independent inspector is to give us a steer forwards. I mean, to actually say we could perhaps talk about it again in another 3 years or whenever the next planning review is, just leaves us in the same position we've been in for the last 15 years. And nobody goes anywhere, nobody benefits. The housing won't be built and the revised boatyard won't be built. So we get nowhere by leaving this issue as it is, whether it carries the QAP 16 designation or one of the new Rotherhithe vision designations with residential. But if it was part of a true Rotherhithe vision for the way Rotherhithe wants to maintain its identity as a maritime centre, then we should for once and for all remove the residential threat. And then we can all move on. And as I say, in 3 or 4 years, when the funding is there and the construction has started and our wonderful plans for a new environment there have taken place, Southwark will be bringing people in from all over London and farther afield to look at this facility. It will be amazing. But to leave it hanging as it is, well, we may as well just give up here. Because quite frankly, I don't have that much energy to carry on. But I'm always an optimist, so as I think, all I can say is I'll leave it in your hands.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kendall. I think it was Ms. Orgelar next, or Ms. Murphy. Ms. Orgelar.
I just wanted to sort of go back a bit and to what the background you'd earlier described, and say that Southwark Marina Boathold Association haven't been put, and the residents there have been put in a very difficult position because obviously an assessment hasn't taken place at the time of examination and perhaps won't be complete at the time of adoption, and therefore we say the plan is not legally compliant and it's not sound with how section 2124 of the Housing and Planning Act 2016. So that's the sort of, that's one primary position which we've already discussed in the previous hearing session in the housing needs matter. The second thing is that that would have fed into a review in this examination of the site allocation, and possibly this will be deferred to a review, but this should have been done at the time of the plan making process and the original consultation in 2018, but the community have been ignored, and it's been right to raise the concerns with that allocation and in this process because it exists in the Canada Water Area Action Plan. And so I just wanted to describe that the position has not been ideal because of that ex-ante assessment, and which is now further delayed because of the new assessors. So that's sort of through no fault of the residents there who've sort of been prejudiced in this process because of that.
Thank you for that, Ms. Orgelar. Ms. Murphy, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that in addition to this process, we've also been engaged for a very long time in discussions with a wide variety of councillors and representatives from Southwark in putting forward proposals for what we know will bring the best possible outcome for our community and for Southwark. And we've actually made a huge amount of progress with their team, with a whole variety of members of our association. Derek's already mentioned we have some world-class architects who live within the docks who've actually drawn up some really inspiring plans. And we were actually at the point in November of being described as co-designers of the best boatyard on the Thames with Southwark. And unfortunately, due to the most recent lockdown, plans and discussions have halted for obvious reasons, but we just want to reiterate, you know, we've really been putting a lot of work into trying to be as constructive and as positive and bringing a really very positive and appropriate vision to the facilities that we rely on, that the wider Thames rely on. And we believe that actually we were being heard at least at that point. And it's just a real thorn in our side, if you like, to keep having to reiterate this in all these little kind of pockets of policy where there's like remnants literally going back to this proposal for a hotel or proposals for these huge residential towers that met with huge local opposition. One of the big factors in why they decided not to pursue that plan. We have been over and over this, but we have been coming forward with really, really relevant, appropriate plans. And we've been working with the council on that plan. And they have been agreeing with us in terms of what is the most appropriate use for this site. And that's why we're really, really we're really pleading with you to look at that as the, you know, the reality of what is actually feasible, what's deliverable, and what is sound for this particular site and right now and for our future. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, just in response, I'll bring in Mr. Thomas shortly. I mean, one of the options that's potentially and could be considered is the New Southwark Plan has its framework, and the London Plan has its policies, and they're there to kind of guide development proposals. I mean, if the council still wanted to, or was choose always probably a bit better. If we arrive at a situation where there is no specific allocation made as part of the New Southwark Plan, but the council's got to a point where, you know, for all intents and purposes, all other elements of the Canada Water Area Action Plan have now been implemented. I mean, bar this particular site and proposal. I mean, is there a scenario where the council could rescind the plan and this site effectively becomes white land and doesn't have any kind of specific allocation other than sort of the general policy framework? Would the council still seek to retain relevant parts of the Canada Water Area Action Plan until a review of the New Southwark Plan?
So I mean, if when we're putting this forward for rescinding to the members, that's the issues they would need to be considering, is following on from your report. So what proposals are we making to the New Southwark Plan? You know, what changes are they being directed to make? What are the modifications that they're being asked to make? And would they consider rescinding the area action plans? And so that's the questions that we'll be asking members when we take the documents for adoption. But at present, we're not in a position where we can do that because we need to wait for your report and then we can move to the next stage.
Okay, and in terms of, I mean, the council's made its position clear in the statement of common ground. If there's to be an allocation for this site, it must include some of the ancillary uses. Is that, Ms. Seymour, a reflection of, because that's in the Canada Water Area Action Plan, or is there other evidence or justification that you would seek to direct me to?
Well, it is in the AAP and it is adopted. We don't consider anything to have changed since then. That is also the view of the council as the owner of the site. So we are the owner of the site.
Okay. Mr. Thomas, please.
Just a very simple point, but obviously in the next 15 years of house building within Southwark's allocation and the plan, there's no requirements for boatyard area in that plan as housing needs assessment across the whole of Southwark. So that makes it irrelevant, putting it as a secondary point for its allocated use. Secondly, there are obviously long-term residents in the area who've been here for a very long time since Southwark took over the boatyard. So in a sense, we're putting at risk those residents who are long-term residents in the area by the fact, number one, we haven't had a needs assessment, and number two, that the allocation of alternative forms of housing for the existing housing makes no sense whatsoever. So you're swapping one set of social housing for another set of social housing or housing per se. So there is no relevance to a housing secondary allocation for the boatyard, in that the boatyard itself provides long-term housing in the area.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any further submissions that people wish to make to leave me with in terms of reflecting on this further? Or do people feel that they've had the opportunity to put across the points that they wanted to, in addition to what's in the Statement of Common Ground? Ms. Murphy?
We'd just like to extend an invitation to visit the site if you haven't already, because it is a very unique, a very special and very important site, clearly to us, but also to many, many other local residents. And its specific geography and features, I think need to be considered really carefully in all of these matters. So we welcome you if you would like a visit and a tour. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I'll reflect on that that invitation. Are there any other further points that people wish to make this afternoon? Thank you. We'll leave the matter with me. I understand all the various points that you've made. I hope you feel you've had an opportunity this afternoon to kind of expand on the earlier session that we've had. I'll just double check with the council. Is there anything further, Ms. Seymour, that you wish to say on this point? No.
Oh, thank you, sir.
I'll just double check with Ms. Sorgela from the Southwark Law Centre. Are you content we've covered the points that you wish to raise or discuss this afternoon?
Yes, I have nothing to add.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you everybody for those contributions. I think that now brings this this Rotherhithe session to a conclusion. So I'd like to again just thank everybody, and I will now draw the session to a close. I'll probably see the council again tomorrow morning, 9:30 for Elephant and Castle. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.